Hi guys, let's talk about the reality of the way we eat, of disordered eating. You know that saying, for some, the quote, "we are what we eat," really becomes a reality because we define ourselves so much by the way we eat, by food, by the way our bodies are shaped. But I want to talk a little bit about today about a relationship with food. And I'm going to go into just different sections real quick. So I just want to give you an overview to help you really understand what you're dealing with. What is the behavior we have with food? What's it all about? How do we gain control over food? And how does this healing process, how does it really begin? How long does it take? I know those are all the questions that most people have because this is a topic that's ongoing and something that seems like, we've been struggling with forever. Hey, Stephanie, thanks for joining, and Simone, thanks for being here. So disordered eating, in essence, is a way of expressing our pain. But the symptoms of disordered eating, or the way that we eat, the symptoms hold stories, very complex stories about our lives. And our relationship not only with food and the body, but our caretakers, the way they fed us and didn't feed us emotionally as needs that we had growing up were met or not met. So this all goes back to the way that we were, the way we started on our relationships with our caregivers, how we experience those relationships, and then we play that out in the way that we eat, and the way that we see ourselves in our relationship with food. So when we're dealing with symptoms, when we're overeating or we're binging or we're restricting, we're trying to, change the way that we look. We're trying to gain that control. It's all about using our bodies as a voice and expressing the way we feel. It's also expressing the stories. So it's really interesting if you stop to think about some of the way you respond to food, some of the actions that you have, and I'll give you an example. If you think about perhaps you have a love-hate relationship with food. Perhaps food is your the most significant relationship you have with another. We can love it, we can hate it, we can desire it. But that's what disordered eating really is all about. It's desire, it's a longing, it's a yearning, it's a need for something. We sometimes don't feel like others, I think, when we get into these behaviors, because they're very secretive, but we sometimes don't feel like others could possibly understand the way that we feel inside. And so we play that out. So some of the goals of overcoming disordered eating is really starting to understand what your stories are, what the meanings are behind them, learning to identify what you feel, learning to identify your emotions, and finding a new way to express them. So in my End Emotional Eating program, for all of you here that have gone through this program, that's a large part of what you began to do was identify a lot of your feelings and the meanings behind a lot of the things that you're doing, your relationship with food, per se. What we're really hungry for, what we really want, when you look at that little kid in that picture, is compassion and love, protection, faith, family. It's all we're looking for, most people. But when we turn to food, it's an attempt to avoid the need for connectedness with others. So food takes the place of our relationships that we have with other people. Keeps us safe. We don't have to get close to people, but we can get close to food. We can love it, we can hate it. So there's a lot of narrative in the way that we treat food. Eating changes the person's, or it changes your need, though, for having to have relationships. And that's why food can be the most significant relationship we have. So let's talk about the symptoms. There's two worlds for somebody who really, really struggles with food, and that's the world of food, and then there's the world of people. But like I said, there's a real link between symptoms and meaning. Symptoms are going to represent your emotional experiences that be expressed through words. So we express it through our body and through our actions. So it serves both an expressive and defensive function. And I'm sure you can understand that. But symptoms, in essence, hold meanings to our lives that have become trapped. So I find this to be just, fascinating because, it always goes back to the beginning, always goes back to our experiences, our ability to regulate our emotions, and then we play that out. And you've heard it before, how we reenact our past, we reenact our traumas, we reenact our experiences unconsciously to try to do it better. Well, we reenact those experiences in different ways. People who struggle with food and body image reenact and express themselves through their relationship with food and their relationship with body. Let's talk about feelings, okay? Most people who struggle with food, who really battle with it, so it depends on what level you're at, but most people in that position really struggle to identify their feelings or their emotions. They also struggle to distinguish other people's emotions and feelings. But there's a real fear, a real unconscious fear about getting close to people. So I want you to think about where you're at and your relationships, and really kind of assess, how do you feel about getting close to people? How are you in your relationships? Do you have fears about being close? Do you have fears about getting hurt? And not just the typical fears. I think we all, try to avoid, disappointments in our relationships or in life. But do you have genuine fears, or have you had that in the past? Have you struggled in your relationships? Do you struggle with trust? But the fear really is the fear of not being understood by another, being misunderstood by another. So you've heard me talk, if you're in my End Emotional Eating program, and obviously this group is, you've heard me talk about parts of self. Someone who struggles with food may feel like their symptoms have a mind of their own, and the reality is there are parts of self, and that's really what we're dealing with, because disordered eating it's not something you want to get rid of, rather something that holds dissociated parts of one's mind. So if you think about the mind, it's got just different sections, that's all. And these different sections kind of step in. So part of healing is really starting to differentiate between these different parts of ourselves. So the part of us that is trying to express ourselves in a safer manner through our relationship with food, through that tug of war, that love-hate, that part of you that gets into that tug of war, that's a separate part of self. The part of you that is strong, that holds to the healthy eating, the exercise, that sees yourself in a more logical, accepting way, that's a different part. So it's getting really in the habit of starting to recognize the different parts of who you are and understanding the different meanings. Why is it so important? Because I talk about it all the time. Why is it so important to identify these different parts of ourselves? We all have them. Because each part holds a different truth, a different reality, and different meanings. So it's incredibly powerful work that you can do. But when we focus on the behavior alone, when we focus on just behavioral techniques, we're not getting into the dirt. We're not, rolling up our sleeves and getting dirty. And that's why relapse rates are so high, and that's why people continue to struggle, because we got to go deeper. You got to go into the structure of the mind, and that's really the goal, is creating new neural templates for new narratives. And we do that through our relationships. And relationships are obviously, huge. People who struggle with disordered eating, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Because once that connectedness that we have with others, once we start to develop that, that's where the fear steps in. Again, so you assess yourself, you assess your relationships, the way you are with people, your love for food, your desire for food. That's what disordered eating is all about, is a desire. And then you think about your relationships and which do you hold a priority, which comes first. And just really looking at those meanings. There's certain things that we can do, though, beginning with start to look at the meanings, start to identify what you feel, start to link words and your actions together. So you're not continuing to express yourself through your body, and you're learning to express yourself using words. Okay. Move from I statements to I feel, search for meanings and interactions. But the goal is to learn how to have a different relationship with food, with yourself, with your body, and learn how to communicate and express that in a different way. So, I know most of you, a majority of you, have all gone through the End Emotional Eating program. And I'm wondering where you're at. Where are you in the process? Are you continuing to take the steps to identify these parts of self, to do this work? People pay, hundreds and thousands of dollars to do very deep psychoanalytic work and really dig in and make that change that we're looking for, to have control over food, to feel better about their body, to not be white knuckling and convincing themselves to feel differently, to argue with the logic that we just dismiss that tells us we're good enough just the way we are. But you can do that on your own. Therapy happens outside in the world. These are things that you can do and take steps every day by just thinking about your relationship with food, seeing how that relationship mimics what unmet needs you had or needs that were dismissed growing up, and how you're finding those needs or filling them in that relationship you have with food. Understanding meanings, your interactions. This is just your next step, your next starting place. So Simone's sharing, I felt lonely most of my childhood because my back then sick brother got so much attention. Food was always there for me. Yeah, Simone, that's so common that we use that. We've all heard this before. We use food for self-soothing, for self-comfort. But the way to change it is, changing the technique that you're using. If you want a core change, changing the technique, not focusing just on changing the behavior, but if you're going to look at the behavior, what does the behavior mean? What's the narrative? What story is being told through that relationship? Stephanie is asking, I was wondering, how do we know when we're ready to move on to another one of your programs after End Emotional Eating? When you've gone through the whole program. Just simply going through the program, because End Emotional Eating, it was really just a foundation, just a first step, and getting you comfortable with understanding we have different parts of ourselves. Understanding is just how the mind works. The mind is structured relationally, and just getting comfortable with this concept. And that's a big first step, believe it or not. And once you do that, you can start to move on to the heavier work. So, the work that I'm going to be putting out there, or some of this information is going to really help you to start walking forward. But you can use some of these things that I've just shared now to start looking at what is the story being told through your actions with food. What meaning is behind them? And learning how to express yourself with words instead of these behaviors, instead of through your body. Denise is asking, I still struggle wrapping my head around it. I'm older and some things are harder to remember. I think a lot of people struggle with memory, and there's a lot of explanations for that. We can have dissociative amnesia, or it could just be old age. I forget things all the time, and more the older I get. But you can start to look at instead your current relationships and what you struggle with in relationships now, because the behaviors you have with food are mimicking not just your earlier relationships, but all of your relationships today. Are you in a relationship? If you are, what's the dynamic? What's the process you go through in that relationship? And start to look at the associations you're making to how you treat food and how you treat your relationships, how food makes you feel, and what you need in your relationships. And that's where you can really utilize the techniques in the E.M.D. emotional eating program, which is once you identify that, start to connect with that younger part of self and identifying that part of self. And I know a lot of people struggle with I don't know how to identify these parts of self. And that's something that I'm working on to provide. There's books, there's workbooks out there, but a lot of them are just really clinical, and you tend to lose people. So you just think of a part of self is a part of you that reacts or responds differently than the way that you would normally respond or act. A part of you that feels one way. When we can think one way and we can feel another way, but they're completely different. The way we think is probably the adult part of you. The way we feel, that sometimes doesn't match, is another part. So you can just look at it with two parts, but that's just the way your mind is structured, and that's what this is all about, is restructuring your mind, creating new neural templates in the brain. If you want to look at the brain, you look at the mind. It's all restructuring, though. That helps. My father was an alcoholic, so maybe some things were blocked. Absolutely. And Denise, we don't, again, to hit on, not remembering, we don't have to remember our past. It's not, it's not absolutely necessary. We just have to figure out, it's kind of like healing from anything, healing from loss, or, we're dealing with a loss. The way we heal from that is we have to create meaning out of it. And until we have meaning, we can't really move on. We have to have meaning. And that's how we get stuck in things, is sometimes things don't make sense. Sometimes we don't remember things that happened. But you can create meaning today, and that's the goal. Again, that's part of the restructuring, is what's the meaning of it today? And helping that other part to learn this new meaning. So this work can get so deep. It can get technical, but they're really simple concepts. It's really simple work. It's just taking it one step at a time. So, this morning I just hit me and to start creating a new program, but really taking the time to create really understandable steps so that you can do this work too. And to just, walk people through it. It's fascinating to see the change. One of the most sought out treatment facilities for those really struggling with disordered eating up in upstate New York uses all of these same techniques, psychoanalytic and working with self states. And so the work that you do in this, just what you've been doing so far, is extremely powerful. And I don't want you to stop. And emotionally eating has had a great impact, and I've learned so much about myself and my relationships, and especially my relationship with food. Thank you so much, Simone. You are so welcome. It's so gratifying and such a blessing to be able to share this work. So, doing the work and staying connected in the group and moving forward, and just being able to hear your success stories and hear how you're beginning to grow and develop is all the things in the world I could possibly ask for. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, you can continue to put those out there, and of course, I'm always checking in, following up, but I wanted to wake you all up and get you moving and give you hope, because that's the driving force to healing, is hope. Hope that we can have those really intimate relationships with people. Hope that we can have that connectedness, and hope for the life that we want. That's the driving force. Okay, have an amazing day, and as I always say, here's to living.